Burgeoning rivalry in the Big Ten. MarkRogersTV just a few minutes after Iowa took out Nebraska 38-17. When the Huskers joined the Big Ten, league officials certainly wanted Iowa and Nebraska to be established as a rivalry, set this game up as that last Friday game after Thanksgiving. And it's been a ho-hum affair the past few years, but maybe it's gaining a little bit of juice as Iowa looks to improve the program in finishing 8-4 this season. And before we look at it from the Iowa angle and where the state of this program is and the performance on this day and bowl projections for both programs, let's take into account the schedule, because we spotlight this here on MarkRogersTV from time to time to bring some clarity to the situation. Because Nebraska came in at 8-3, Iowa 7-4. Their schedule's identical in 6 of the 8 Big Ten games, but the other 2, Iowa played Ohio State and Wisconsin. Nebraska had to face Penn State and Illinois. Okay. Not surprisingly, Iowa lost both of those games against Wisconsin and Ohio State. Nebraska won both of its games, Penn State and Illinois. You flip-flop those situations, and most likely Iowa wins those 2 games like Nebraska did, and the Huskers lose to Wisconsin and Ohio State, and suddenly you've got Iowa 9-2 coming in, and Nebraska at 6-5. So keep that in mind. Both teams finish at 8-4, but a scheduling disparity. And as these conferences expand and get larger, that becomes more of an issue. Okay, let's break this one down because, again, the Big Ten would like this to be a rivalry, and it's not come together in the first few years, but that takes time, and that takes proximity, which we've got here with Iowa and Nebraska. Of course, that's the natural rivalry. And also with both teams performing on the field. Nebraska has basically held up its end of the bargain. Iowa has not, finishing 4-8 last season. But the Hawkeyes now at 8-4. Kirk Ferentz mentioned after the game that when he was asked if this was truly a rivalry, he said, well, it's a start. It is a start. He had mentioned during the week a number of times that this wasn't truly a rivalry, that Iowa needed to step it up. But he said it's a start. And in terms of the elevator ride that his team has taken the past few years, Kirk Ferentz says, hey, I would like to get off the elevator. We did that back when I first took over the program in 1999 and 2000, 4-8, 8-4. And we typically expect Iowa to be a fringe top 25 program, to win 8 or 9 football games. But 4-8 last season, they've really not had a good football team since 2009, but they finish off strong at 8-4. Now let's break it down, because what really separated these football teams today was discipline and execution. Nebraska turned it over 4 times. They made a number of other mistakes in special teams. In particular, Iowa played a very clean, strong, solid football game on both sides of the football. So Nebraska, they had the 2 interceptions from their pocket passer, Ron Kellogg III, who finished, I believe, 18 of 35. That's the last stat that I had before I set up. 18 of 35 for a $198. Kellogg, in comparing him and Tommy Armstrong, the other backup to Taylor Martinez, Armstrong, the more dual threat, who really can't pass that too downfield. Kellogg's the guy with a strong arm, and he throws it with conviction. But he threw it twice in the first quarter with conviction to the other team. And those interceptions by 2 of the best linebackers in the Big Ten, in James Morris, who's racked up almost 400 career tackles now. He picked off a pass that led to an Iowa touchdown, actually the first score of the game, 7-0 Hawkeyes. And also, Anthony Hitchens with his first interception of the season. That led to no points at that point, at least. Actually, the Hitchens touchdown led to the... Yeah, it was the Morris interception that led to the touchdowns. Hitchens also with an interception. Iowa with tremendous front 7 play on defense, especially those senior linebackers, and we saw it again today. So Kellogg tosses 2 picks early. Iowa gets up 7-0. Also in the special teams portion of the football game, Westerkamp made 2 huge mistakes. He's a redshirt freshman for Nebraska. One, he lost the football in the sun. It was down inside the 5. That led to a score for Iowa. Also, he fielded a punt over his shoulder. It was the next punt he saw, so he probably wanted to prove a point that he could track the football. Caught it at the 3. That led to an Iowa score as well. Iowa just played a clean football game. The defense is really good up front, as we mentioned, with the three senior linebackers, Morris and Hitchens, leading the way along with Kersey. And they put the sandwich on Ameer Abdullah late in the football game when this thing was 24-17 and Nebraska still had very much a shot in the game. And on a key play, they sandwiched Abdullah, forced a fumble that led to an Iowa touchdown that pretty much salted away the game at 31-17. Jake Rudock was shaken up late in the third quarter. There was about a minute left in the quarter. He was hit from behind as he was following through on his pass and tracking the football downfield. He was clipped in his left knee, had to leave the game, never returned. C.J. Beathard, the backup quarterback, true freshman, came in, only threw 2 passes because, fortunately for the Hawkeyes, they had a 2-touchdown lead, and they milked the clock from there. But he missed on 2 passes. Rudock, very efficient at 9 for 15 for $126 and 2 touchdowns with no picks. He's really improved in his sophomore season. Hopefully, he's okay and will be good for the bowl game. Mark Weisman's a player that Iowa discovered last season as a fullback, moved him to tailback, and gave him the football, and he was very productive last season. Started off this season very much the same way, averaging 24 attempts per game through the first 6-7 games of the season. Over the back half of the season, they've only given him the football 10 times. He's been less productive because of the attempts, but also the yards per carry. He's a guy that gets stronger as the game progresses. He got banged up. He got worn down. They went to Canzeri more often, who's been very productive in a more limited role running the football. 6 attempts today for Canzeri for 59 yards. Weisman lugged it 25 times for 73 yards, but keep in mind that his per carry average was much better than that. He was much more effective when Rudock was in the game. They took Rudock out of the game with the knee injury, and the Nebraska defense really loaded up against the run, and Weisman didn't have a chance as they were milking the clock late in the game. Kellogg, again, at quarterback. It's unfortunate that Taylor Martinez, who's had a prolific career at Nebraska, has not been able to complete it and will not play in the bowl game. Abdullah ran it 23 times for 85 yards. He was a workhorse in this game. Really didn't have rushing room against that front seven on defense. Only had a long run of 12 yards, so Iowa did a great job of containing him. He scored a touchdown. He caught a couple passes. Kenny Bell, 7 for 67, but again, less than 10 yards per reception, so they did a nice job on Nebraska's best receiver. Canzeri, again, 6 carries for 59 yards. Fedoritz caught the first touchdown for Iowa to make it 7-0. The big 6'7" tight end, C.J. Fedorowicz, has caught a football reception in 31 consecutive games. Michael Rose, a player to look out for on the Nebraska defense as I kind of scan my notes here, at that outside linebacker position, defensive end, an explosive player, and Bo Pelini hopes that he's around to coach this kid throughout the rest of his career. Which brings us to Pelini, who finishes this season at 8-4. We note the scheduling break that he gets this season, so this is probably not an 8-4 football team. They were ravaged by injury, specifically Taylor Martinez at quarterback, but along the offensive line, on the defensive side of the football as well, Nebraska never really had their full complementary of players to start. At the same time, they're not recruiting at the level that you would expect, but at the same time, this is a difficult place to get kids these days because Nebraska, the brand name, is not what it was in the 1990s. And to get kids from Florida and Texas and California to come to Nebraska, the very high-tier guys, that's almost an impossibility. So you got to get the 3-star guys and coach them up. And you're not going to get the wealth of talent, the numbers in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, that area, that region, to come to Nebraska and be able to compete at the highest level in the Big Ten Conference. Martin-Manley dropped a touchdown pass that looked like it was going to be costly as it was still a 1-score game at that point, but he came back to make a tremendous reception for a touchdown that widened the gap. Bo Pelini's going to catch some flack for a 4th and 3 call in which he went for the fake punt. His punter didn't have a chance. I don't know if he had the option, if the punter was looking for a particular blocking scheme or to see if the rush was going to back up for the return or if he was going to be rushed, but he made a bad decision because he had a chance seeing that he had no opportunity to gain the first down conversion to punt the football downfield, and that turned into an Iowa touchdown as well. So Nebraska made the mistakes. There's not a whole lot of difference between these football teams when you talk about speed, athleticism, strength, size, talent. It was that Iowa played a much better football game. So Kirk Ferentz gets the Hawkeyes to 8-4. The Huskers fall to 8-4. I would expect a flip-flop of these two teams in regards to the bowl slotting. Nebraska could be headed to a Texas Bowl to take on a Big 12 opponent, which would, for that bowl slotting and for that bowl game, would be a pretty attractive matchup with Nebraska taking on somebody like Texas Tech, possibly. And then also for Iowa, they've possibly moved themselves into the New Year's Day conversation for an Outback Bowl or a Gator Bowl to take on the SEC, in which the Hawkeyes would look on paper to be a little bit overmatched against an LSU, but certainly look at the history with Kirk Ferentz coaching up his team for 6 weeks, heading to a bowl game in Florida. He's done rather well against the likes of Florida, LSU, South Carolina, and Georgia Tech. Would love to know what you have to say about Bo Pelini's situation at Nebraska. Should they keep him? I believe I would give him one more year. They were ravaged by injuries. I don't think that 8-4 consistently is acceptable at Nebraska. I don't think it should be. I think 8-4 is fine. A considerable amount of time, but you need to break through with 10 and 11 win seasons. So Pelini, I believe, should be safe at this point. The buyout's $7.6 million, so that's obviously going to play into the decision-making as well. The Iowa situation, much brighter, considering what they came from last year with 4 wins and the way the season started in a lackluster fashion. But with wins against Nebraska and Michigan down the stretch, this Iowa team competed against everyone. They only lost in Columbus by 10 points. Despite the 28-9 score, they played very well against Wisconsin. That was a 5-point game until late, 14-9. They beat Michigan. They beat Nebraska. They beat Minnesota handily, 23-7, a decent Minnesota team, as we see. They took out a Northwestern team when the Wildcats were still relevant at that point in the season. And the Michigan State loss was a hotly contested game in which Iowa played pretty well, especially on defense. So Hawkeyes fans, Huskers fans, college football fans need to hear from you. Let's hear your comments on Nebraska and Iowa football right here on Mark Rogers TV.